Welcome, my beautiful, wonderful listener, to the Talking About Talking podcast, where we talk about everything and anything, and we talk about talking about those things. Today, I am joined by Scott Wilson. He worked for the OPP for 33 years, and he now teaches at St. Clair College for the Justice Program. He also teaches first aid and occasionally still helps with training for the OPP. Thank you for joining me, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
Happy to have you, man. Something that I've been thinking about, Scott, you teach, you were saying, what were you saying? You're going to be teaching here pretty soon at St. Clair College. What did you say there?
Criminal code and federal statutes.
Yeah, sounds incredibly boring. But with that, I have in my lifetime been very cynical about government and judicial system. And I still am quite a lot cynical.
Are you a retired cop too then?
No, I'm not. But what I'm getting at is that I've more recently started to think about these things, these systems that are in place. And
absolutely,
they're in a different light, because I thought I just maybe a month ago, I started thinking it's really easy to criticize these things. Being a critic is easy, right?
Absolutely. Armchair quarterback, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I got to thinking, well, yeah, there's a lot of flaws with these systems. You can say these systems suck in a lot of ways, but also they're also pretty good. They're also we also don't have just an abundance regarding the judicial system. We also don't have an abundance of rape and theft and murder right now. So that's cool.
We're pretty fortunate that way. Yeah.
Right. So what is your take on those thoughts? Just kind of the balance of like the incredible flaws that the judicial system has, as well as how incredibly well it does to keep a little bit of tranquility, however you want to say it, with current society.
So interestingly enough, when I teach at St. Clair College, some of the students, the first thing that they have a hard time understanding about our judicial system is that the Canadian judicial system works by the letter of the law. And that means that technically guilt or innocence hasn't got as big a role in things as people think. Proving something happened is, of course, paramount. However, if the letter of the law isn't followed, guilt or innocence is irrelevant, because if the letter of the law is not followed to a T, then there's a violation of the charter, and that charge or that law, that whole thing is thrown out.
So what you mean by that is, like, if something happens and the like step-by-step process of the police or the judge or anyone in the system, if they make mistakes, it all just goes away?
Yes, absolutely. So I arrest a guy because he's impaired driving. He's all over the road. Several people call about it. They're worried he's going to kill somebody or drive off the road or whatever. And I arrest him, and I forget one step of the system. I forget to let him make a phone call to a lawyer, or let him know that he can call a lawyer. Say I forget that step. I got 10 witnesses in court who saw him driving all over the road. Everybody could smell the alcohol on him, but because I did not inform him that he could talk to duty counsel or his lawyer or whoever, the case can be thrown out.
That's such a catch-22, because in one perspective, you might think, well, that sucks. This guy clearly made some errors and we don't want him driving. We want him punished for his terrible decisions. But on the same token, if you're the kind of person that makes poor decisions at some point, you kind of want the system set up in a way where you need to be treated appropriately, and you deserve that phone call, or you deserve to be able to call a lawyer or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And that's understandable, but it gets that's just a very simple breakdown of how it works as a real simple example, but it gets more complicated than that. It gets to the point where, okay, so you told him he could make that phone call, but he doesn't get the lawyer that he wanted to talk to because his lawyer isn't available. So he talks to another lawyer. And then he goes to court and says, I didn't get a chance to talk to my lawyer that night. And it's possible the judge could say, yeah, you know what, you should be allowed to talk to your own lawyer. Even though he wasn't available, we're going to throw this case out. Like, that's a stretch, but there's case law where things similar or even less have had the case tossed for that reason. So sometimes it's very hard for the public and for people to understand that we work by the letter of the law. So everything falls on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. And if it's not followed exactly perfectly the way the judges think it should be, or the Supreme Court of Canada thinks it should be, then the charges are gone.
I do want to discuss the Charter of Rights and Freedoms at some point. You mentioned like every step of the way, you got to do the things right or everything gets thrown out. People notoriously know the Miranda rights in the United States. And
yes, because we're indoctrinated with American TV.
Right. And that it's important that you're read your Miranda rights properly. Like everyone knows that because of pop culture or whatever. It's the same in Canada. We just have something different, right?
Yes. We don't call them the Miranda rights. We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Oh, but what is it called when you have to read them off there, or you have to like say this thing when you're arresting them?
It's simply you read them their rights.
Oh, okay.
Rights to counsel.
Oh, rights to counsel. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Yeah. So when it comes to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, let's just dive right in here, Scott, with the latest happenings around the world and our wonderful holy leaders' decisions. There has been a lot of conversation recently about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And
absolutely.
People discussing how they've been compromised on a grand scale. What do you think is causing people to feel that way?
Well, the problem with some things that the government is allowed under our charter, there are exceptions that the government can take, steps that they can take to circumvent the Charter of Rights and Freedoms if they can prove that it's for the overall good of society. So I'll give you an example. Case law has said over the years that in Ontario, the police cannot routinely stop you and ask you questions about drinking and driving. It's against your Charter of Rights and Freedoms to be randomly stopped.
Isn't that what a ride program is?
Absolutely. And that's where I'm going with this.
Okay.
So it's against your Charter of Rights to be randomly stopped. Usually there has to be a reason for the police to stop you, an HTA violation or some other reason, right? But the government of Ontario is allowed to change that. And there's a clause in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that allows for that to happen if they can say that the overall good being done by that breach of the charter helps society. So most people agree that ride programs are a good idea because it discourages impaired driving and it gets people off the road. And most people feel that the slight inconvenience of being stopped for 30 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever to say, hey, have you been drinking tonight, isn't so bad a breach of their charter rights. So the government has said, yeah, we're going to implement that clause and allow that traffic stop to be made, even though it's random and it's constitutionally wrong. We're going to circumvent the system and use this clause to allow that to happen because it's better for society to get drunk drivers off the road. We save lives, we prevent loss, property damage, all that stuff. And generally people go, yeah, you know what? Okay, I agree with that one. So that's one way our rights are violated technically.
Yeah, I saw on Facebook recently someone posted like, hey, there's a ride program here or something like that. Just a heads up to people. And they got roasted on Facebook because everyone was like, those are there for a reason, dumbass. You're not supposed to tell people about them. Like, you're only helping drunk drivers.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
You want to be the person who told the drunk to go around and you find out
that they hit somebody.
Yeah, they hit and killed somebody. Then how do you feel about that, right? Oh,
yeah.
Shit, I let that guy know where the ride program was. He went around and killed somebody on the adjacent road or whatever,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
The clause that I'm thinking of, sorry, I had a breach there. It's called the notwithstanding clause or section 33 of the charter.
Oh, okay. Okay, and that is to
circumvent portions of the charter.
Okay, so then that just begs the obvious question, what the hell the point is of a charter of rules with a rule that says you don't have to follow these rules?
Well, so Parliament has to sit on it. They more or less have to agree on it. It's not something they can just arbitrarily do. It has to be proven that it's for the betterment of all.
Okay.
Before it's allowed.
Okay. So before I get into that, because that's a whole pile of weeds, the thing where you said most people agree that like ride programs are a good thing, was there a vote on that? how do we know that most people agree?
Honestly, I don't know how that came into be, but I know that it can only override certain sections of the charter, which deal with fundamental freedoms like legal rights and equality rights and stuff like that. But it can't be used to override democratic rights.
What's the difference between equality rights and democratic rights?
Legal rights and equality rights, like they can breach the charter to, like I said, to stop you arbitrarily, even though it's been proven that an arbitrary detention is wrong under the criminal code. They've used that to circumvent that, to say that, yeah, okay, it is bad, but we want drunks off the road, so we're going to allow it.
Right. So what's an example of a democratic right? Like a right to vote?
Yeah, you can't change that.
Okay, so they can do things like stop me, potentially search my things, referring to a couple of years ago, make me stay in my house, not let me leave the country, all those things, but they can't take away my right to vote.
Yes.
I think out of those two things, I would prefer have my right to travel and leave my house as opposed to my right to vote.
Yeah, well,
if I have to pick one under a gun,
Yep. Yeah. Look at Doug Ford. The unions want to strike. The teachers union wanted to strike, and Doug Ford said that he would invoke the notwithstanding clause to prevent them from striking.
Yeah, that was a little bit rude, wasn't it?
So, depending on your perspective, right? So, parents are saying, hey, society is set up now that both parents work and kids have to go to school because there's not enough daycare.
Mm.
And now you're going to say that you're going to allow these teachers to strike. And then what do I do with my kid? Now I can't go to work. I'm losing my rights or whatever. So the government's like, well, you know what? Then we'll prevent them from striking.
Yeah, but then you're taking away the right to protest.
Yes.
Is that not a democratic right?
Yes.
Well,
it is.
Is it?
In a sense, but...
Is a right to protest a democratic right, or is it, what were the other ones? Equality and...
Well, you have the right to peaceful protest.
Yeah, but does that fall under a democratic right?
You know what? Honestly, I'm not sure the difference.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure the difference.
Because if it does, then he's misusing the notwithstanding clause.
Yeah, exactly.
Shouldn't they have,
I don't know who decides. Eventually, I'm sure it goes up before the Supreme Court of Canada, and then the 9 judges that sit on the Supreme Court of Canada may ultimately make that decision. We're governed pretty much by whatever the Supreme Court of Canada says when it comes to the charters and arguments about rights.
And there's 9 people on the Supreme Court of Canada.
I believe it's 9. It's been a while since I taught that portion.
So why are these 9 people so special?
They're appointed by their peers.
Do they have like a 4-year window where they can operate like the prime minister? Or have these people been in power for like decades?
I think it's a lifetime appointment.
So if you're friends with one of those guys...
Yeah, that's the whole thing with lawyers. They decide who has experience and judgment and knowledge to be better than them or higher than them, I guess, ultimately in Canada.
So lawyers decide who become judges?
Lawyers, yeah, pretty much.
What? How does that work?
This is getting out of my bailiwick.
All right. We'll stay within your toolkit here. So that's something I just not necessarily look for expertise, but maybe a little bit with opinion. This whole idea that like, let's go back to the greater good, because that's
the greater good.
Oh, that shit just bugs me. It's like, okay, define good and bad. Just go ahead and do that. It's like one of the most difficult things to do philosophically is defining good and bad.
Yes.
Right? So like, and then if we talk about consensus good that a group of people agrees on, that's just absurd. Like, good luck finding that. There's controversy everywhere, especially right now with the internet and everything going on. There's just division all over the place, polar opposites everywhere, extremists everywhere. And so like when this whole notwithstanding clause is based on for the greater good, well, who the hell picks what that is? Like,
that's something you got to talk to lawyers about. We're starting to get way ahead of me.
Yeah, I know.
In my area of expertise.
No, I hear you. I'm just saying, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do we trust that these people are going to have a greater good that's going to be, good?
Well, you're never gonna have 100% agreement with anybody. It's impossible, right? In my mind, I think ride programs are a good thing. I think puts people on notice that they could be stopped randomly if they've been drinking, and it makes you think twice
Yep, I agree.
about getting behind the wheel. So that one, in my mind, is a good idea.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
As far as making teachers go to work and not being allowed to strike, I have my own personal opinion about that too. And as a police officer, I was never allowed to strike. Even though our contract was expired and we didn't agree with what was happening, we had to continue working, and our association had to go to an arbitrator or whatever to get an agreement.
So why is that? Why are you not allowed to strike?
Well, I guess we're deemed an essential service, right? You got to have cops on the road. If they don't go out because they're on strike, and people know the cops aren't going to do anything, it's not going to be good, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because if the cops are striking, then people are going to be like, "Hey, this is a great opportunity." And
I've always wanted a brand new diamond bracelet for my wife, and there's one in the window at the jewelry store.
Well, I guess that would just mean your strikes would hold a lot of power.
So we're not allowed to strike. And so lots of times in my career, our association has gone to arbitration with the government because neither party could agree. And ultimately it gets resolved. And ultimately the independent arbitrator looks at it and goes, okay, these other police services got this much of a raise and they did this with their benefits and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to compromise and say you're going to get X amount, right? And it usually works out. I mean,
sometimes the arbitrator is a middleman to communicate with the government.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, and I recall lots of times when we were 2 years past our contract. We had worked for 2 years without a contract. They couldn't come to an agreement.
Really?
But eventually that it's going to be resolved. So I don't know. Personally, I think we're off topic from policing, but honestly, I think
we're just talking about shit, man. That's how this goes.
Yeah.
Just talking
honestly,
about whatever.
I think in this day and age, there's not a whole lot of need to strike. Like the olden days when you got fired for looking at your boss the wrong way, or they just didn't like you, so they fired you, or you had no rights if you got injured at work. Oh well, we're not hiring you back, and all that stuff. Those days are done. There's legislation in place because those unions fought hard to get all that changed, and that's awesome. But I think we're at the point now where what does striking do? It doesn't benefit either side.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I can have an opinion on it because I think it's all too complicated for me to have a good enough opinion on it. I think the ability to strike is important because I think powers that be can always overuse their power, and like not being able to strike kind of loses your defense against that.
Yeah, and that's the argument, right? That's a big thing.
Yeah, I would like to think back to this kind of greater good thing. I know it's outside your wheelhouse, but to me, I feel like we should try to at least give a little bit of definition to the greater good. Like maybe these powers that be should sit down for a little while and hash out.
Well, the argument is it's a democratic society, and if the majority rules, right? So majority of people say that this is a good idea, then that's the decision that gets made, right? So if you're in the minority, you feel like you've been slighted and your rights have been violated, but the majority of the population is saying, no, I agree, you should be stopped at a ride program, so sorry about your luck, right? And that's the thing about a democratic society.
Yeah, what about the when it comes to the right to strike and the right to protest, while we're kind of on that subject and we're in Canada, I feel like we should at least mention the teeny tiny little protest we had recently with a couple trucks.
In Ottawa.
Yeah, the fringe minority.
Well, I have my opinion about that.
Would you like to share that opinion or reserve
and it has nothing to do with the Ontario Provincial Police. I want that said on here because
of course.
I don't want to get in trouble.
No, you're not representing anyone. You're representing Scott Wilson.
I think the Trudeau government was wrong in implementing the Emergency Measures Act. That was not a threat to the government or a threat to the country. And I personally think that was BS.
Agreed.
When the last time that clause was used in Canada, there was an independent, what's the term I'm looking for? Well, Trudeau's father implemented that back in the 70s during the FLQ crisis. And there was a diplomat from a foreign country that was kidnapped and murdered. There was bombs going off all over Quebec City. Things were blowing up. Mailboxes were blown up. There was a bit of
Jesus.
mayhem going on. So yeah, at that time, I can see that. You know what?
Well, I mean,
All hell's breaking loose.
exploding
People are dying.
mailboxes, bouncy castles, they're kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of
Uh,
people, like, I've talked to a few different people about this because, I mean, when it comes to conversations like this, I just enjoy them. I enjoy talking about things, if you couldn't have guessed. The people that are against the trucker convoy, the people even in Canada that I've talked to that are like, oh, they shouldn't have done that and blah, blah, blah. They'll always be like, oh, I have a cousin or I have a friend with a brother that whatever that lives in Ottawa, and their honking kept them up all night, or they couldn't get to their job, or their kids couldn't get to school, and all of those things. I'm like, yeah, okay. And nobody died. Like they weren't killing and pillaging and raping. Oh, they said if some random people in this massive group of people said some racial slurs to you or were mad at you for some stupid reason, yeah, you're going to get assholes in large groups of people. There's assholes everywhere.
Absolutely.
Like, and then you see the photos around social media of like the Canadian flag upside down with like a swastika painted on it or something. And it's like the same photo propagated over and over and over and over again. And it's like, oh, okay. So the news outlets went and found one little group of real assholes, took a picture of it, and then spread that everywhere. But if you were at the time paying attention to social media, people were posting stories and videos all the time of actually being there. And there was just people partying all over the place. And so many videos that you can still find of like the truckers being compliant. And you're going to come take our gas? Okay. You guys showed up with freaking automatic rifles to come take our fuel, but fine, we'll give it to you anyway, you know? And there's just so much about it that isn't being shared in the mainstream media about how peaceful of a protest it really was, because that doesn't support the mainstream agenda. And
well, see, that's a whole nother discussion we can go into, right?
okay.
How much do you trust the media?
Exactly. And that's why
So,
I'm like, I don't trust the media, because like, who's the media funded by and how does that tie into the government? And then like, you know that all the money in the government and the media are all going to tie into one nice, neat little nest. And so the government's not going to allow the major media companies to propagate any information that would go against the government. So then clearly anything negative for the decisions they're making is just going to be squashed or just not spread, right?
well, there's that thought. Absolutely. Is it happening? I'm not going to go into it.
And I'm
I
not
have
saying,
my own feelings again, right?
yeah, I'm not saying that it's happening definitely either, just to be clear. It just seems so obviously, I don't know, possible. It's like,
Well, the news media has changed. When I was a kid, and I'm old, so I can say this, when you watched the news, there was two sides, and they would show you these are the people striking, this is what they're saying. These are the people that are representing the factory, this is what they're saying, and they would just leave it at that.
they would just,
And it was up to you to form your own opinion. Now the news is telling you what you should think.
yeah,
And that bothers me that they're taking sides. They're supposed to be independent fact reporters. That's it. Not taking sides, not telling you who you should vote for or who said this or who said that. It strictly should be a neutral investigation.
I totally agree. They should be there to share data, share information about what's going on.
As a police officer over the years, you go to a call, you have to have an open mind. You go to a neighbor dispute and you have one neighbor saying that their neighbor did this and the other one's denying it and saying that they didn't do that. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. I have to be neutral when I get there. I have to decide, okay, is this real? Did this happen? Is there proof of this happening? And it's based on facts and evidence. It's not he said, she said, and this is what I think he's an asshole. And, well, that's great. You think that, but from what I'm seeing, there's nothing been done wrong. And, so for me to watch the media now and see how, well, down in the States, it's horrendous.
Yeah, how one-sided it all is.
You got your CNN and your Fox News on complete polar opposites, right?
It's like, why would you trust either of them, really?
Yeah, exactly. And we're starting to see that in Canadian media now, and it's disheartening because I always was proud of the fact that as Canadians we didn't have that crap going on up here. But sadly it's getting that way.
Yeah,
like the Ottawa protest, for example, the CBC ran, like you said, all those pictures over and over, the same pictures of the one picture of a flag with a swastika on it. And they tried to label everybody by that one picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the social media with policing now. One cop steps out of line among thousands and thousands of cops, and that's the story that the media wants you to read. You don't read about the 800,000 calls that went successfully and people were happy with the results because the police helped them. You only get the one bad cop that did something stupid.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to go into here. So first I want to step back a little bit. Has there ever been a moment in your career where the media was propagating an opinion or a story or a perspective, and then that affected your work, where there was something going on that you could see a change in the culture and the people, you were getting a influx of a certain kind of call or anything like that?
No, not directly. I was pretty lucky that way. A lot of that stuff hasn't been going on that long. So it's only in the last 10 or 15 years that you're starting to see that stuff, you know? Most of my issues with the media was it was always an inopportune time for them to be there. That was the most inconvenient thing. You're in the middle of an investigation. There's been a horrendous car crash. People are dead. Family hasn't been notified, and the media wants to get footage of it all. And so they can show people. And you're like, you know what? Can you just give us a little bit here? Because this is not appropriate for everybody to see. And the people that are missing loved ones haven't been notified yet. You know, it's been more of an inconvenience or a pain in the ass than anything. But I haven't had any personal experience with them influencing my job because of public opinion or whatever.
They often will report with creative liberties. Have you ever?
Oh, absolutely.
Have you ever been involved in a substantial call that you later saw on media and kind of just had like a what the hell? How did they take that out of that, or why did they go that direction or anything like that?
Not directly. Not me directly. I've seen it, and I'm not going to go into this at all, but I saw it during the Ipperwash clash.
What's the Ipperwash clash?
When the First Nations people took over the military base at Ipperwash.
Oh, okay.
They basically reclaimed their land that the government said back in the 40s, hey, we're taking this land, we'll give it back to you after the war. And they never, ever did. And the First Nations people said, hey, we want that land back. You've been promising it. We're taking it. And there was a clash with the police, and it's a whole nightmare. There was some facts that happened in that I know happened, and the media brushed it over and never brought any of it to light.
That's too bad.
And we were told as police officers that that's the way it's going to stand. And if you don't like that, that's too bad.
Rough.
Yeah. So, but I'm not going to go into all that because that'll open a whole can of worms.
That's all good.
Yeah.
So you were talking about like showing up to disputes, and I'm sure that's commonplace in that kind of work. Because I mean, realistically, I had a few years back, Clarky, you know Clarky?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, basically telling me that the OPP need guys. Like, they need guys. You should go apply. And I was like, yeah, maybe. I don't know, toying with the idea. And then my fiance was basically like, no, don't do it. Because she was like, everyone changes. Like, everyone becomes a different person. Because the job is really like, you're signing up to deal with people that are in need, but also predominantly the bottom of the barrel people. Like, and not necessarily who they are as a person. I just want to be clear on that. It might be their circumstance. It might be where they were born, how they grew up, and stuff like that. They're not necessarily all bad people. I would say very few of them are. It's most often going to be circumstance, but you're still dealing with the bottom of the barrel people, and you're signing up for that. So it can be hard on people to have to be around that. What is your take on that?
Absolutely. And when I speak to the students taking the Police Foundations program at the college, I talk to them about how this job will change your life. You're dealing with people at their worst. You're almost always dealing with unfortunate circumstances. It's very rarely a joyful experience. Somebody's had something done wrong to them. They've been a victim of something. So normal people you meet are at their worst because they're victimized. The people that are causing the victimization are, like you say, usually the bottom of society, the desperate people, the put in circumstances where they may or may not have a choice to do what they do. And that's, they've made the wrong choice, obviously, by society standards. And yeah, so you see that negativity your whole life, and you deal with people who are angry and upset, and you never see a lot of joy, unfortunately. So it's rare when it does happen, and it's treasured for sure. But it changes you. Absolutely, it changes you. And the cynicism towards policing, especially now with the media. I mean, like I said, you have, the OPP has 6,000 guys on the road. One guy screws up and does something wrong, and that's what makes the news, not the other 6,000 guys that are doing their job properly every day. It's that one bad guy that's in the news. So it's very disheartening. And what other profession do you get centered out for? I mean, there are some, but if you walk into a place of business, nobody goes, oh, there's Trevor, the personal trainer. He's going to look at me and say, oh, I'm fat and out of shape. And he's probably going to lecture me about getting thin.
I
and
sometimes
taking up.
get that, but
Sometimes.
but you're right.
But
very
do
rarely.
you ever walk in somewhere and somebody goes, oh, the cops are here, hide your donuts, or
Yeah.
oh, there's the cop, he's out having a drink, he's probably going to drink and drive when he goes home. And you're always judged because you're the cop. And so it changes you. You lose friends, you start socializing with only people that you feel you can trust, and mostly other cops, because they're going through the same thing you're going through. And you close down from society because the media tells you the cops are bad and hate cops. So, and you're only seeing people when it's bad and negative. You start getting tired of people, and you don't want to deal with people, and that's your job. Yeah, it's hard on a person, and you need mental health methods to get you out of that. An interesting psychologist that I used to talk about when I did training was the way he works it is, so as a cop, you're walking around all day long and you're in a state of anxiety because you have to be. You have to watch your six all the time. There's bad guys out there that hate cops. They're going to do things to you. So you have to be on the lookout all the time. You have to be watching. You have to be alert. So your heart rate is elevated most of the day. Your metabolism is elevated most of the day because you're constantly in a state of watch. Then when you go home, you relax and you bottom out because you've been at that high, and it's exhausting keeping your body and your metabolism up that high all day long. So you go home and you relax and you crash. And eventually what happens is you start associating work with feeling good because you're upbeat, your heart rate is higher, your metabolism's faster, and you start equating home life with depression because you're depressed, your metabolism slows down, everything shuts down, you don't want to deal with people because you've been dealing with people all day. And this psychologist talks about how you have to break that monotony. And if you don't know how, there's a lot of cops that are in a dire straits right now because they don't know how to break out of that cycle. And what he says is you got to get out and participate in your municipality, get it out and play with your kids outside, get involved in sports, get involved with other people, right? I'm fortunate in that my wife used to make me get out of the house when I come home. So yeah, it's changes a person drastically. I don't have any of the friends that I grew up with or went to high school with. I haven't seen them for years.
And did you cut ties with them, or did they cut ties with you? Or was it just kind of a mutual thing?
I think we just drifted apart because there's so much difference now in perspectives. And if you're not part of that police environment, trying to explain to people what you do and why you do it when they disagree with you gets exhausting. So you just avoid those people.
Yeah, well, changing people's minds is really difficult. That's one thing I talk about on this pretty extensively, which we can get into if you'd like. But the part where you're talking about how much it changes you, and this like running on high all day, and you mentioned like 6,000 people employed by the OPP. It's kind of like just a statistical guarantee when you think about putting humans in this state of just high alert, fight or flight for so many hours, for so many days. And then you put a pot of 6,000 of them in that state and you give them all this power. You're guaranteed to have one of them fuck up.
Oh, absolutely.
Guaranteed one of them is going to do something stupid eventually. But it's like, I don't know, at the same time, you can't, like we were talking about before, the we don't have an abundance of stealing and rape and murder. So I'll take the one guy messing up every once in a while over the abundance of theft, rape, and murder, right?
And don't get me wrong, there are guys that get hired that probably shouldn't be, and there are abuses of power. There's guys that get off on having that extra authority, and there's guys that feel after a while that society owes them something.
Were you ever on scene for something like that?
What do you mean?
Like a guy puffing out his chest and doing something stupid?
Oh, I've worked with guys like that over the years, and I've made it clear in no uncertain terms, I won't tolerate it. Like, you're not doing that around me.
So how does that work when you guys are basically equals?
Well, I've usually I can diffuse a situation. I'm very fortunate. I talk well with people and I get along well with people. And
You're a
there's
sweetheart,
lots
Scott.
of circumstances that I've been to where somebody's going to lose it and shit's going to hit the fan, and I've been able to de-escalate it.
That's good.
Some guys just don't have that ability. Some guys have the unnatural ability to escalate things beyond where they should be. And then there's a few young guys that just are looking for a challenge and will push buttons to try and get the fight going or whatever, right?
Yeah, that whole try me mentality.
Yeah, exactly. They got something to prove, that chip on their shoulder or whatever. I've worked with all those guys. I've made it known to them that that's not going to happen if you're working with me. That's not the way I operate, and I'm not going to tolerate it. And if you go offside and I'm asked about it, I'm going to tell the truth. Sorry, I'm not. Why would I allow something that makes cops look bad to continue to happen?
Right. Well, when you boil it down, that puts you in danger too.
Absolutely it does. And I've explained that to people before. So most times when I worked with those guys, nothing happened because one, I was either there and I could de-escalate it, or two, I would show them how to use de-escalation skills instead of going off the handle.
So when it comes to de-escalation skills, I'm sure it's like a lot of it is, not I'm sure, my guess is that a lot of it is empathy and understanding and making the person feel heard and
Absolutely.
that kind of stuff, right? And I feel like a lot of that can carry over into relationships, like
for sure,
spousal relationships and such,
yeah,
and friendships. And like what's the protocol for de-escalating a situation? Because just in my mind, I feel like someone listening to this might be like, oh, my husband or wife or buddy or whatever it is, we always get into, conflicts about X, Y, or Z. And then maybe these OPP de-escalation strategies would be helpful for that.
Well, kind of, because they're all the same. And what we teach our guys are hooks and triggers. So what is something that's going to trigger them to go offside? Learn what that is and avoid that, and learn what's going to hook them in to allow you to talk to them. So, for example, you go to somebody who's going through a mental breakdown and they want to kill themselves or someone else. Then you work on not what's the negative thing, not what's causing the problem, but work on other things that are positive in their life. And what do they want? Yeah, your boss is an asshole and you hate him and you want to go to work and shoot everybody there. Okay, what's going on in your personal life? Do you have kids? Do you have a family? Oh, yeah, you have kids. Okay. They calm down when you talk about those things that are important to them. So those are the things you focus on. You don't focus on the negative things that are irritating them because that gets them riled up. That's a trigger, right? So you learn by having these conversations what makes them angry and what gets them to calm down. Whatever works at calming them down, that's where you steer the conversation. And then eventually, when a person feels like they're being heard, just like you said, and they're being understood, then you've built that bond and you start to get trust. Once you get that trust, then people are willing to change or do things for you. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what we teach, what the OPP teaches. And I've taught that for years. It's funny how now, with the news media, police training has become all about de-escalation, 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 de-escalation. Don't shoot people, don't tase people, de-escalate it. And the irony of that is we've been doing that for years. That hasn't changed. It's just now the public is seeing it and realizing it for the first time. But we've always had that training and that understanding. So, and I think, and this is just my personal opinion, but I think the OPP is really good at it because of our background in rural policing. When you're the only guy out there and you're dealing with people alone, you have to be respectful of people and you have to gain their trust and their confidence. So you can't just go in there with 5 guys, beat somebody into submission and throw them in the back of a car because you're the only guy.
Mm-hmm. You're going to have to use bullets at some point.
So you have to be able to de-escalate things. You have to be able to talk to people one-on-one and learn how to communicate and learn how to get cooperation, right? Am I saying it's going to work every time? No, it's not going to work every time. There's people that are high on drugs or alcohol or whatever, and no matter what you say to them, it's not going to work. And
or they're just really stubborn.
now you're not talking about your personal life, are you?
Maybe. No. So with this de-escalation strategy, have you came to a scene or had a moment where you showed up and things were just like way on high, and just in your mind you were like, oh, this shit is too far gone, we are not bringing this back, but like you managed anyways?
Oh yeah, lots of times in my career, lots of times. I can tell you about a time when another officer who was notorious for getting into confrontations called for backup because he had stopped a car and the people in the car were not supposed to be with each other. They were on conditions to be not together. And this person had a record for assault police, several convictions for it. So basically, it painted the picture that every time he got arrested, he fought. So this officer calls for backup because he says it's going to be a fight. There's going to be a Donnybrook. I just know this is going to happen. And so I showed up and I approached the guy. I said, listen, I'm aware of your background. I'm aware of the conditions that you're here. And I don't want to fight and I don't want any problems. We have to do what we have to do. And we had a long talk and ultimately he said, yeah, okay, I get it. And he surrendered and we arrested him and took him in and he was processed. Did
you have a conversation with the officer that called backup afterwards?
Yeah, I did. And I said, listen, let me do the talking because I think I can handle this. I think I can resolve this without any problems. And I did. And that's just, not everybody has that ability. And I'm very fortunate to have gone through all the years I did without too many incidents. My wife always said, I'm sure that the people that you talked to finally got sick of you talking and just decided they would get in the car to get you to shut up. And that may very well be. But I always thought it was easier to talk than it was to fight.
Yeah.
Because no matter how good a fighter you are, eventually somebody is going to be better than you. And I don't want to have to be in that position. So, or were there times when I had to physically force somebody to do something? Absolutely, there were. But trust me, I went far beyond trying to resolve it before it came to that. I'll guarantee it did, because that was always my philosophy. I don't want to have to fight if I don't have to. And I was lucky. I'm a bigger guy and I've never had too many problems. So I was fortunate that way. I don't know.
Yeah. For whatever reason in my head, your comment from your wife makes me imagine you like showing someone your stamp collection or something like that. And then this one,
just my kids, I'm going to talk with this.
just take me in, officer. I don't care about your stamps. I surrender. Yeah. So yeah. I love this because this is what the whole talking thing is all about, right? One of my main points is that all conflict is misunderstanding.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that you say absolutely, because I mean, that's what I think. And not to make an echo chamber or whatever, but I have had an individual that I said that and they were like, no, not all conflict is misunderstanding. And I was like, oh, okay, let's talk about it. I found it intriguing. But to me, every single conflict at some point or another involves a certain amount of misunderstanding, and possibly conflict could be 100% misunderstanding. All conflict. I think that's possible.
It's a high percentage. Absolutely. I'm not going to say it's 100% because honestly, I think there's circumstances where some people are going to hate no matter what you do or say.
And then I would argue that involves misunderstanding at some point when you boil it down.
Yeah,
whether it's like a lack of knowledge or something, Yeah.
Yeah, could very well be.
Yeah. And I just love that you're kind of talking about a very extreme use of using communication to resolve conflict. Because like that's the premise of what all this is based on, right? What I'm doing here is that you don't need to have conflict, that you can just communicate your way through it, right? I have this fantasy of world leaders that are having wars to just, instead of murdering a bunch of people, just sitting in a room and talking for like 3 hours and then going and having a walk and then talking for 3 hours and then going and eating lunch and then talking for 3 hours and just doing that for days on end until they resolve their conflicts, as opposed to blowing the shit out of people that they don't know. But
yeah, but war makes money.
Yeah, I know. And
sadly,
unfortunate that we need money. It's too bad. So
I was raised with the treat people like you want to be treated rule. And I'm never above someone else. Just because I have money or status that they don't have doesn't make me their superior. And I've always had that attitude growing up, and I was raised to believe that. So having that understanding that you're no better than anybody else, you're just not in their circumstances at that particular time, it gives you a great advantage. And you need to have that empathy to realize that, hey, just because they're having a really bad moment doesn't mean that I have the right to treat them like I'm superior or they don't know what they're doing, you know?
Absolutely. And I think about, excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. I think about what you're talking about with people being in certain circumstances. And it's funny because some people will take like a little bit of a step in the direction and they'll go, well, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have made this decision, or I wouldn't have done X, Y, and Z, or I wouldn't be behaving like that. And I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, maybe. But also, what if you were in every single situation that that person has been in from their birth up until now? Then you would just be that person. And
absolutely,
then you would be making the same decision that they're making. And
yeah,
it's like,
you don't know what their life has led them to make that decision. You're not privy to that information. So you just have to understand that whatever set of circumstances led them to this, they felt they were justified. So now we have to come to some form of agreement that, hey, this behavior has to change, or this is not what society's going to accept. And yes, I understand your opinion and it's different than mine, but as a police officer, my job is to do what I've been appointed to do. And you at this point have come to this set of circumstances, and we need to resolve this. And how can we resolve it peacefully, right? Sometimes, unfortunately, it might lead to charges or whatever, but that's a society thing. Society put those rules in place and hired me to enforce them. That's, you know, but yeah, you never put yourself ahead of someone else or above them. You don't know what led them to those circumstances. So you have to have compassion. You have to have understanding, and you have to have the ability to reach a point where, okay, I've given everything I can give. You're still not cooperating. I have no choice. You've pushed me into a corner, and this is how it's going to be resolved, you know, and that's policing. And as I said, I spent years of trying not to have those physical confrontations because I feel, good Lord, this is 2023. I think we're smarter than that. I would like to hope.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe with the things that are happening in the world, it's hard to say that we're above pretty much anything. That's something that I find interesting too. You talked about we're smarter than that, and then I'm like, yeah, but like unfortunately, I feel like if the sun has too big of a fart and a solar flare wipes shit out, like, are we just all going to be peaceful everywhere like we are now? I don't think so, right? Like if someone fires a nuke and then shit starts going to hell,
well, then all bets are off.
Yeah, like, is everyone really going to just be like, oh, it's 2023, we're peaceful people? I think it's going to go down to survival of the fittest pretty quickly. And
absolutely.
I just try to think about, like, if that's in our back pocket at all times, what does that mean for our current behavior in any given moment? You know what I mean?
Well, you have these hopes that society's going to go that way. I mean, look at when the pandemic happened and all of a sudden there was no toilet paper, and you see people walking out of the grocery store with 16 large packs of toilet paper. Like, come on, people. There's other people that live here too.
And like, you can just get in the shower to clean your bum off.
Yes.
Right? Like everyone's
buy a bidet.
Yeah, I did not understand that. Like, if you don't have it, you could use a sink. Like soap and water if you need to. Might be a little awkward, but Jesus, is toilet paper the thing? Is that really the thing?
Yeah, you know, right away society's going downhill when we have to have hoard.
It's just such an odd choice to me. So
it was very odd.
Yeah, just unusual. So with the communicating to people, like de-escalating, and you're talking about how you're appreciative that you have this skill to do that. I think that's good that you have that awareness, because one of the things I talk about is that I say communication sucks, and it's in like, it sucks in its efficiency. It's not very good. Like, we're sitting here talking, and like, how much have we shared over the last, we've talked for like an hour now. How much information have we really exchanged? If you kind of write it all down, it's not much. And it's taken a lot of effort.
Just opinions.
Yeah. Well, that too. But I mean, if we count that as information, it's just, I'm just saying that talking and communicating is just so clunky and slow. And like, the human thought is one of the most complex things in all existence. And then we're using grunts and gestures to try and exchange them back and forth. And it's, what I'm saying is, it's definitely a skill. It's definitely an ability that is important. And I think with this, I want to encourage more people to try and strengthen their ability to communicate. And what you're talking about, this de-escalation thing, I think is just a direct, excellent example of usefulness in communication and how that can change your quality of life. Because like, if everyone had Scott Wilson's OPP de-escalation skills, there would just be so much less conflict on the planet, right? Maybe you're not the best, but I'm just saying in general, you're definitely good at it based on what you're telling us. And so like, I just feel like more people need to work on those kind of skills, you know?
Yes. And it's unfortunate because society has we communicate better now than we've ever communicated, but actually we're worse off communicators than we ever were, because now we communicate through text message, which doesn't convey your emotions and your tone of voice and your actual thoughts. It's can be taken. I don't know how many times you've received, I'm sure anybody can think of it. They've received a text and went, well, what the hell do they mean by that?
Yeah.
And then you talk to the person, they're like, well, I meant this. Oh, that's not at all what I thought you meant, because there's no tone of voice. There's no, oh, that was sarcasm. Oh, okay. Well, I was pissed when you said that, but there's no feeling through that.
Yeah. We don't have a sarcastica kind of text. Yeah.
Tone.
Font to use.
Font. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate, because we communicate better through better means than we've ever communicated before in the world, but we're actually getting worse at it, I think.
I totally agree. And that's something I was just talking to Charisma about the other day, how like, we don't have, I was like, it's amazing that we don't have new words. Cause like, to me, communication is everything. It's just everything. It is the foundation of our existence. It's the most important technology that we have, and we don't work on it. We don't improve it. We're like, electric cars and we're going to space and look at all this medicine. And I'm like, yeah, cool. How about we work on, talking to each other? Because then everything else gets better that you're trying to work on.
Absolutely.
All the other shit that you're working as teams on, right?
Yep.
So like, I said to her, we don't come up with new words, for example. And she's like, oh, well, we do. And she's right. We do, like selfie and all this other shit that's emerging as new words. And it's just aggravating, because it's like, oh, okay, we have another bullshit word to describe some bullshit, stupid stuff that's just not helpful, not moving us forward. It's not advancing anything. Okay, we can better understand this one stupid little thing that it was 17-year-old girls doing, and now everyone's doing it and whatever, right? But I'm like, okay, the things that I talk about here, like I have this Lego hologram analogy, and it's like, it's a big explanation on how conversation happens, and how when you and I are, so to break it down for you, when you are talking, it's like we're building a Lego structure together. Right?
Yes.
And every time I say something, I'm adding a piece. And every time you say something, you're adding a piece. And the problem is, I can't see what you're building and you can't see what I'm building. Right? It's like there's a hologram of a Lego structure floating between us, but we each have our own.
Well, yeah, that's essentially conversation, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going through your mind while you're talking to me, and you're only giving me tiny bits of what you're actually thinking. And the same thing goes for me. So we have to communicate better, so that, and the best example of that is being in a relationship. How often in a relationship do you miscommunicate to each other because I didn't realize that hurt your feelings? And then you don't tell me that. So now I'm unawares and I've made it worse. So we have to communicate better to understand each other, to say, hey, I'm upset about that. And if you don't communicate that, then things get worse. And so that's essentially the secret of longevity in a relationship, is being able to compromise first and foremost, and then express yourself properly to your partner.
Mhm.
Because if you keep things hidden and inside and never really express it properly, you're not communicating properly, and you're not going to get your wants and needs taken care of.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just a little secret. How often do you miscommunicate to your partner? Personally, very rarely. And very rarely does she miscommunicate to me. And I would attest that to a lot of these kind of frameworks that I have, because I've built some of them with her and I've shared them all with her. And having these frameworks makes communication so much easier. The Lego hologram, as an example, I always talk about this difference where I've said it multiple times on the podcast, where like if you and I start a conversation and we don't really set intention, we don't really talk about subject, and in your mind you're building a dragon, and in my mind I'm building a spaceship. Well, they got a lot of similar features. The wings, they fly, there's fire, like, right? And then we get to a breaking point where we realize that you're like, oh, whoa, hang on, spaceship, dragon, wait, which one are we talking about here? And then we're like, oh, we're talking about two separate things that sound very close, but they're just not the same thing. And so with that understanding on how misunderstanding manifests, there's been many times where Charisma and I are going back and forth, and I'm just like, what, how are you not getting this? And she's like, oh, I'm building a different Lego thing. Don't worry about it. Keep going. I see what you're building now. Keep going. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Resolved. Right.
We've had that. My partner and I, my wife and I have had that many times. Get through, and it gets a little heated, and why aren't you understanding this? And then all of a sudden there's that recognition that, we're both we're coming from two completely different perspectives here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's, to bring this back to what I was talking about with new words. To me, it's like this whole analogy of a Lego hologram I find very useful, because it's a visual structure to build on in your mind, and you can use it for so many different things to help understand conversation and misunderstanding and how it all happens and how it all comes to be, because otherwise conversation is not very tangible, right?
Absolutely.
And we can better understand things when we use words that we have that can apply to life better. Like we say time flies or time stands still. Well, times, to describe time, we use words that are based on motion of objects. Right? Objects will stand still or fly, or things will fly, but they can't, like, time isn't a thing. So we have to tie those kind of words to it. Right?
Yes. To give it tangibility.
Exactly. And so to me, I'm like, this whole Lego hologram ridiculousness that I came up with myself, why the hell aren't we trying to come up with words that explains that easier? Why aren't we inventing words that everyone can understand that explains those things?
That's a great analogy, though, the Lego thing. I love that.
I do too. And so,
but there's probably a word for it, Japanese or something.
That's what I mean.
Their culture's been around for a lot longer than ours.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like if because I've heard of that kind of stuff before too, right? Where you hear of other languages that will have words for things, and you hear the description, and you're just like, holy shit, why don't we have a word for that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of just what I'm saying, is we should be working on words a little more. It'd be useful technology to develop. Have you found in your life any particular word or phrase that you have found especially useful for de-escalation or just for any kind of communication? And I'll give you an example. I've worked on, and I can go into more of why this has been useful, but the use of yes and as opposed to yes but. I find yes
that's interesting.
And incredibly useful, because yes but, you're saying yes and then you're saying no. You're saying I acknowledge what you're saying and I disagree, which is not really what I try to say. Yes and is I acknowledge what you're saying, I agree with it, and here's more to add to it.
That's a great phrase to use. Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, I never thought of that before. And honestly, I've never thought about particular phrases that work better for me than any others. I think what's happened over the years is I've learned what works and what doesn't, and just added them to my regular vernacular. So
just intuitively.
Yeah, without thinking about it. over the years, you change the way you speak and the way you communicate because you learn what works better.
Can you remember anything that you used to say that doesn't work particularly well?
No, honestly, no, I can't. Nothing comes to mind.
It's
I
okay.
never thought about it before.
That's fair. Yeah. Not it. Well, I mean, like we're talking about talking, right? Not very many people talk about talking, and not very many people think about talking. They just let it happen,
You're
which is
right.
like, it's astonishing to me because realistically it's how you navigate life, right? We're social beings. It's you use your body to navigate the physical world, and you use your language and your communication to navigate the social world.
Well, you think about it, communication is what separated us from all the other species on the planet. We communicate better than any other species,
Do we?
or we can get our ideas across better. I don't know.
Those dolphins, man, and whales and shit, like I'm
But they haven't
pretty
figured
sure.
out how to come out of the ocean.
Yeah, but do they need to? Maybe they just got everything they need to. They got
So
everything
what
they need.
separated us? What made us decide?
Well,
I
no,
think it's
I think that's
communication.
part of it. I think what you're saying is part of it. I'm just
Yeah,
saying I really wonder if we're going to cover all bases. I really wonder how well dolphins and whales communicate.
Oh, I'm sure they do communicate as much as what works for them. They can find food together. They communicate that. They can mate and procreate and they communicate through that. Absolutely, whatever they need to exist.
But they
But we're
don't.
the only species that communicates our thoughts and feelings, our needs are risen above that.
Mhm.
And I can express to you what I need to accomplish or what you need to do to help me directly.
So you just brought to mind a question I've had that's unanswerable, that I kind of want to just see where you're at with it.
Run by.
Yeah, run by you. So there's like the mind body problem. Where does the mind start and the body start, and like where does each of them end or whatever? And there's the ultimate question of like, why are we here? What is our purpose? And like there's religions and branches of different things, and there's this sense that everyone kind of has this deep-seated why. Like, why do I exist? Why am I here? Everyone wants a purpose, right? And people think about this ultimate purpose of humans in the universe. Why is the universe exist? Why are we part of it? Why everything, right? And so I've thought about, it seems like there's two possibilities that I can think of, probably more, but the two possibilities that I can think of that I'm trying to chew on is, one is the fact that we have this why, this existential why. Why does everything exist? This philosophical
Need
wonder.
to question.
Yeah. Is that sense enough evidence that there is an answer, right? Is this a cumulative sense of everyone having this same question, why are we here? Is that enough evidence that there must be a reason, right? Because that seems to be what most people operate under, is that, well, we all wonder, we're all wondering, so obviously there has to be an answer, right?
Yes, and that's why we've created religion.
Exactly. And that's why everyone was looking to the stars for answers, and that's where a lot of, and then looking to psychedelics, and that's where a lot of religions came from, was psychedelics and stars and crazy weird shit. I'm wondering, what about another option? What about through evolution, we developed our prefrontal cortex by eating meat or whatever it was, or increasing calories. And what if the brain just developed this questioning of why? Why is it when I strike this rock to this other rock, it creates a spark? Why is it that dropping that on my foot hurts? Why is it that this animal behaves in this way? Why is it that this bush smells like this? Why? And all these whys helped us judge things in the world, help us better understand the universe around us so that we could survive better, right? And
Absolutely. The whys are why we're where we're
exactly.
We're here.
Exactly. If we weren't wondering why every step of the way, we just wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have made it this far. So
that
then,
and the constant need to improve or
yes.
change.
Yes, and we could talk about that. I'll address that in a second. So I wonder, this incessant wondering of why of every little thing, maybe through evolution, that has just conflated to a wondering of why we're here. And that's the root of why we wonder why we exist. Maybe it's just an evolutionary exaggeration, much like the hip to waist ratio. Whereas if you show a silhouette of women to men, the hip to waist ratio of the woman will determine how attractive the man finds her. And that's for childbearing, right?
Absolutely.
But it goes so far as if you show them an extreme hip to waist ratio, like 50% hip to waist ratio, which is absurd and would actually be terrible for childbearing and unnatural to find in the real world, they find that more attractive than a 70% hip to waist ratio. So our brain has gone to the extreme in that direction. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I don't agree with that, but yes, I see what you're saying.
So which part don't you agree with?
The extreme hip to weight ratio.
No,
I
it's
don't
not.
find that attractive.
No,
But
it's not.
that's my personal.
Yeah, no, it's not. I'm not asking what you're into, Scott. No, I'm telling you that's what ends up happening statistically is that men will rate the women higher with the extreme hip to waist ratios. And it doesn't make sense because that's not good for childbearing at that point, right? And so this evolutionary thing in our brain has just gotten so extreme in that direction. And so I'm wondering if the same thing happened with our wondering of why. If we just wondered why this rock, this berry, this here and there took off over time and has just hit a point where now we're like, why us?
I think mankind has always asked, how did we get here? Why are we here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why religion has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Even before Christian religion was here, there was religion saying that there were higher beings or something that created this, because we are too uncomfortable with the idea that we were an accident and it just happened through evolution, that we just, by questioning why or how or what can we do to change things, we evolved, our need for other things. I don't know. I always joke and say that women are the reason why the human race has evolved the way it has. And the reason for that is if men had their way, we would still be living in caves. We'd have a big barbecue and a giant screen TV, and that would be all we needed. But women thought it was drafty in a cave, and we needed to put a door over it, and then it was dark, so we needed lights and windows, and carriages were uncomfortable, so let's build something more comfortable to ride in. So we evolved to cars, and I'm pretty sure that women are the reason why the human race has evolved to this day.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to what you're talking about, this incessant need to improve. And Joe Rogan talks a lot about this idea that maybe that's part of our programming. Maybe we're meant to just continue improving until we build this new thing that we integrate with.
Absolutely. I kind of sometimes have this this science fiction idea that we're, like you say, maybe a computer that was programmed to start this and see where it can go, and continually advance and improve. And I don't know where the end is. Yeah,
well, then people talk about simulation theory, where statistically or mathematically or something, we are highly likely in a simulation. And I'm just like, okay, well, where's the difference between the words simulation and universe? Like, how are those two words that different in meaning?
Well, then you start looking at things like the movie, the goofy stuff going on, right?
And when people are like,
absolutely,
oh, it's all a simulation, I'm like, okay, well, even if we are in a simulation, then everything's still real, right? Like you're still, by our definition of being in this simulation, it's still real. You're still experiencing pain. You're still experiencing emotions. You still have an experience that's within the simulation. So it doesn't really change anything on how you should behave if we're in a simulation.
No, because we don't know how to get out of the simulation. So either way, you have to adapt to the simulation that you're in.
Right. And even if you get out, isn't it another simulation?
How do you know?
it's all turtles all the way down. It's all turtles.
I think you're right that our constant need to question everything has led to our evolution. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering.
Constant need to improve, the constant need to question things.
Yeah, and I'm wondering like this, because comparing the idea of our thoughts on why we exist, giving you the feeling that there must be a reason, feels less possible as opposed to we just question everything. And we had to, at some point, question our own existence.
Well, and that's the thing. You start questioning everything in your life, and then you reach the point, just like you said, where we've gained enough intelligence to actually sit back and go, okay, so why are we here now?
Yeah, once everyone's fed.
We've brought ourselves to this questioning to the point where wait a minute, now I'm understanding who I am in my environment and why am I here? Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
an interesting thought for sure.
So with the yes, but and yes, and comparison, where I kind of came to that conclusion, we built this 0.5 analogy. So the 0.5 analogy is if I'm talking like I am now, I have to explain steps of the way. I can't just say the punchline or you're not going to get it.
Yes.
And as I'm going and I'm hitting each little point, you do things like say yes, or you nod your head or something like that to assure me that you're following along correctly.
Yep.
And I'm going from point 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And that's where the whole 0.5 analogy comes in. I was finding problems in all of my relationships, and I did not have a way to explain this until charisma. And we broke it down and we came to an explanation that it was this 0.5 framework that I now have. And I was very emotional when we came to it because it was the major conflict in all my relationships prior, because it was this idea that I needed to be right. I knew everything I needed to be right. This feeling that these people were having when I was in relationships with them and having conversations with them, that was not the case. The case was that I wanted to go somewhere. I had a 0.5 in my mind that I wanted to get to. And as I'm sure you can tell, Scott, I am not short for words when I explain these things. I am a very verbose individual. I like to use a lot of words and paint a fancy picture as I go on my journey to this 0.5. And so I'd be trying to bring them to a place, and they would say something that would diverge the direction. They would say, yeah, okay, 0.2, cool. Now let's go over here. And I'm like, yes, but... And
we didn't get to 0.5 yet.
Yes, exactly. And I'd be like, well, okay, no, or not that. And I'd be trying to bring it. And then they'd be like, you're not listening to what I'm saying. You think I'm wrong, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you're not wrong. I'm listening. I get what you're saying. It makes sense. You're making valid points, but it's just not where I'm going. So I have found incredibly useful this 0.5 analogy, because Charisma and I now have it where she says something, I say something, and then she goes, no, 0.5. And I'm like, oh, okay. I gotta just sit along for the ride here. I gotta let her go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where my yes and has come in, because I learned that when people try and diverge the conversation in a direction that I don't want to go, if I say yes and I've acknowledged that they've made a valid point, and then I move it back in the direction that I wanted to go.
That's a good way of looking at it. Absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I like that idea. I think it's very worthwhile experimenting with from my perspective.
Yeah. Next time you're
That being said, what gives you the right to steer the conversation the way you want it to go?
That's a great question, Scott. Yes. And that's where, when I was talking to Rob, he was talking about agendas and how each person in a conversation has an agenda. And then the third agenda is the emergent agenda,
Yes.
agenda that comes to be. And
well, it's when I talk about policing, I tell everybody there's three sides to every story. There's your opinion, there's their opinion, and somewhere in the middle is a recollection of the truth. That's what you got to find. And it's when you have that conversation with someone, when you have a conversation with someone, like you say, there's three conversations. Mm-hmm. There's your conversation, what I'm going at, and then there's that invisible Lego system in the middle that we're creating.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I was just about to say that. That's perfect. That's where it all ties in, is my agenda is my Lego structure that I can see, and your agenda is the one that you can see, and the emergent one is the one that comes out of the two kind of formed, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And your question that is, what gives me the right to direct the conversation, is a great question, because I also kind of hybrid this analogy with like navigating a jungle, and that the speaker essentially has a map. And they're like, okay, let's go this way, let's go that way, right? And every once in a while, someone else in the conversation, whether it's a group or one other person, can grab the map and be like, okay, but like, let's check this out over here while we're over here, or something like that. Or they can take over and take it in a new direction.
Yes. Ultimately, the conversation usually starts with somebody having an agenda. This is what I want to get across to you. So where that conversation goes from that is depending the variations of the person you're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I love the question, what gives me the right? And nothing really gives me the right other than like
common courtesy most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that becomes complicated, because sometimes you get caught up where I guess this is where it comes in, where people say, oh, that guy, he can just talk and talk, right?
Yes.
Where you run into someone and they're like, oh, hey, and they start taking you on a journey through a jungle. And you're like, oh, shit. You're like, I got somewhere to be. I don't want to be rude. But they're like, let's go check out this tree over here. And there's a rock. And let's turn the rock over. And there's a little iguana underneath. And you're just like, oh, fuck.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And they're so nice. They're so kind.
And I'm sure I've done it to people.
I've definitely
done it to people. And I know I've had it done to me.
Yep. You know, on that subject, something that I have paid attention to often, and I'm not a master of like body language or anything, but one of the main things that I've paid attention to with what we're talking about now is this, like, holding people up, is where people's feet are facing. When you're talking to someone and it's kind of like the end of something, or they're passing through and you've caught them or whatever it is, if you pay attention to where their feet are facing while you're talking to them, that's how you can determine whether or not you're being a nice, rude person. Right?
Kind of pointing away from me.
Yeah.
It tells me that you're kind of done with the conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
Have you ever paid attention to that?
I've never really thought about it. I usually can tell when I'm getting people to the point where, okay, I've kept you too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you seem pretty empathetic in that way. Pay attention to it sometime. It's really, really profound how well it works if you pay attention to where people's feet are facing. If their feet are facing you, they're loving what you're saying. They are. They're game. They're in for it. Whatever you're saying, just keep going. Like, they're having a good time. If their feet are facing like 90 degrees, they're kind of on the fence. Yeah. Right? Or like 45 or something. But if they have like 1 foot turned directly away from you,
they're trying to escape.
Wrap that shit up.
You're probably onto something there.
Yeah. I have found that immensely helpful in my life.
The grocery store conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, did you ever run into that as a police officer where you're on the job and people are like, hey, officer?
All the time. Because, like I said, it's a spotlight profession. So you have your people who somehow love the police and want to know everything they do and what their opinions are on everything. And they kind of put you on a pedestal, which sadly, I shouldn't be on a pedestal of any kind, because I'm no different or better than anybody else. But they want your opinion, and they want to tell you stories, and they want to hear your thoughts because of your position. And it's sad that they have to justify their life through my opinion, which, like I said, I have no intrinsic value to give anybody as an opinion. But yeah.
So about being a police officer, you have a certain amount of power. And have you heard of the Stanford prison experiment?
Probably, but it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, this professor took some college students, put them in, like, I think it was a section of the school that wasn't being used anymore or something like that. And he assigned some of them to be prisoners and others to be guards. And the rule was like no violence, no physical violence. So you got to punish the prisoners for not listening with other things. And like there was another rule, I think it was like they have to eat all of the food on their plate every time they were served, and they weren't served like the greatest food or something like that. And I believe he screened everyone for like a history of violence and all kinds of other shit to make sure he didn't have any ex-criminals or anything involved in it, right? They were all normal, nice seeming people. And he intended on it running 2 weeks. And I think he had to pull the plug after 3 days. And someone might have died or almost died. And it just got incredibly out of hand. And what caused him to stop was one of his students. She came in to check on how his experiment was going and to check on him. And the look of horror on her face was what made him go, oh shit, I need to stop doing this.
Got a little too far.
Yeah. And it was because he realized that he was basically in the role of warden. He had assumed the psychological position that he was a warden for this makeshift jail. So he had power.
Yes.
And I believe, not entirely sure, but I believe that he, at least after that study, was of the opinion that all humans are capable of horrible, awful things when they're put in a position of power, if the circumstances are right. He's like kind of had this idea of, I think there was something about like the people in Guantanamo Bay or something, and how he's like, I blame no man for the horrible things they do if they're in a position of power, because power corrupts absolutely, or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's the old saying, right?
Yeah. And so 33 years on the job, you must have, whether or not you recall, had a moment where you were even just a little bit abusing your power. The question I have is, do you recall a moment where you either in the moment were going a little too hard with your power and then like, oh shit, maybe I should dial it back, or after the fact where you thought back to it and you were like, yeah, maybe that was a little too much?
Honestly,
It would
I think
require
it was
humility to be able to pull that out. I'm just asking for the sake of
actually, I
asking.
think if anything, I was the opposite. I was so afraid of abusing my power and so afraid of being hated that I tried very hard to be as balanced and neutral as possible. I'll give you an example. So I was a traffic cop for 12 years, and my job was traffic enforcement, speed limits, seatbelts, all that stuff. And I wrote a lot of tickets on the 401 highway and all over the place, actually. But I had a set of standards that I held myself to. And it's like the old, you're okay on the 401 if you don't drive more than 20 over the speed limit. Generally, nobody will bother you if you're under that. My limit was higher than that. So I felt that I was more than justified for stopping people that were doing 30 and higher over the speed limit. Sometimes I would stop people, and depending on what their record was like or their attitude was like, that would make the decision for me on whether I'm writing a ticket or not. If they had a horrendous driving record, then I'm sorry, you need some action that's going to correct your behavior, so you're getting a ticket. Or if I pull you over and you say, oh, hey, I got this going on in my life and this is what's on my mind right now, and I've never had a ticket before, I'm really, really sorry, then I'm more than likely to go, okay, I can see that. Have a great day. I tried very consciously to be, and this is going to sound stupid, but 99% of the people that I wrote tickets to thanked me when they left.
Really?
So I don't feel like I abused my power.
How?
There
How did
were
they
times
thank you?
you treat them like a person. You explain what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, and they appreciate. I think people honestly respect you if you give them a legitimate reason for what you're doing and treat them kindly and with respect. You generally get respect back.
That's awesome.
Now, did I unfairly write tickets to some people, abuse my authority, as you say? Yeah, I stopped some people and they treat me like absolute dirt. Then I'm very likely not to give them a deal or a break. Because again, that goes back to the golden rule. I was always raised by the golden rule. Treat people like you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
You want to treat me like an asshole, I'm going to treat you like an asshole back.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. You're nice to me, I'm going to be nice to you. And I don't recall specifically going overboard with anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, it would be really hard to recall something like that, let alone be aware of it at the time, right? Because these are, like, I don't think even these people in this experiment that I was explaining, I don't think they were thinking they were going overboard. Even the professor didn't think he was going overboard, right?
Right.
So it's a really difficult human thing to have awareness of.
I don't recall ever holding my power over anybody. Like, hey, I'm this and you better not do that.
Yeah, because I said so.
Yeah. I've never been that kind of guy.
Yeah, you don't seem like that kind of guy.
I did my job the best of my abilities. And like I said, I wrote all kinds of tickets as a traffic cop,
Mm-hmm.
and I think in my entire career, I can count on one hand the number of people who came in and complained about me, because I like I said, treat people the way they want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you broke the law. This is why I'm here. This is what we're going to do. I see by your record, you have a habit of this. I'm sorry. This isn't where a break is needed. This is where you maybe need to talk to the MTO and say, hey, I should keep my license because I really want to and I need it for my job. Well, then you got to change your behavior. Those rules were set in place by society, supposedly to help us all. So that's why you have to be held to that account, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, hey man, don't let it keep you up at night. It was just a question. I don't want you laying in bed. Did I abuse my power? I'm an awful person. No, that's good. I like that answer. So something that you're kind of talking about, and you've mentioned trust quite a lot. trust is there's two frameworks, and I could tell the one you operate on. Some people operate on trust no one until they give you enough reasons to trust them. You seem to be the kind of person like myself that operates on trust everyone until they give you a reason not to.
Yes, and that can be bad as a cop, right? But that being said,
and that's what I wanted to kind of address, is that I feel like a lot of police officers would probably operate more. If you had to kind of, I don't know, interview or survey people, I bet you the profession that is police officers would be a higher population of people that operate under trust no one unless they give you enough reason to trust them. So
yeah,
I find
absolutely.
it so fascinating that you're in the other boat.
And I'm just lucky, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I was lucky to get by all these years without anything happening because of that trust. I don't know. I know that when I teach younger people now about policing, I basically tell them not to trust anybody.
Okay, so you operated.
But I pride myself in the ability to read people, and I trust my judgment on how to read people.
But you don't trust your students' ability to read people.
No, not necessarily. And so you shouldn't trust anybody until you acquire that ability. That's my mind. And so I'll give you an example. So been with my wife for 30 years.
Congratulations.
We meet people, and in the past, this has happened. We've met people, couples, and afterwards, of course, as a couple, you discuss it. You know, what did you think of this couple? And I've been criticized by my wife for saying, I don't care for that person. There's something about them that that just doesn't sit well with me. Mm-hmm. Through the way they talk or their actions or whatever has led me to don't really want to spend time with that person.
They rub you the wrong way.
There's just something. And my wife laughingly calls it my spidey senses. And over the years, unfortunately, my spidey senses have proven fairly accurate because my wife's always like, no, they seem really nice. You're just misreading them. They're a good person, blah, blah, blah. After more visits, more time together, after a while, I get you know what, I think you're right. That person something's not right there. And it's always after the fact.
Yeah.
And over the years, my wife has said, yeah, I don't know why I don't trust your opinions, because most times it works out. And I don't know if that's from years of policing where you meet so many people in so many circumstances, you start to learn how to read people. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm full of shit. Maybe I don't know.
No, that would totally make sense. I mean, your job is to be reading people at all times when you're, like you're talking about, you're in that high alert mode. And
yes,
if you're not reading people, if you're not anticipating their next move, you could be in danger, right? Or someone else could be in danger.
And then that's what I tell young people when I talk about this is there's nothing wrong with being friendly and treating people nice. It doesn't mean necessarily that I'm going to turn my back on them and trust them, because anything can happen at any time. But there's no reason to treat them bad because you don't trust them. You can still not trust people and be nice.
Yeah. I've had some people that, like, without getting into too much detail, that like come to my gym, and just being around them over a little bit of time, I'm like, I do not like this person. I'm like, Oh my God, I don't like them. And then any kind of interaction that I have with them, I'm just nice, positive. Part of it is like, I'm a business owner, you kind of got to be. Yes. But also, like, this person hasn't given me a reason to be mean to them. They're still a person. And I try to remember, like, I am that person. If I had every circumstance that they've had from birth up until this point, I would be them. And so I kind of just, like, my initial judgment, I let that sit on the back burner and try and be nice. And then over time, eventually come to a point where I'm like, hey, they're actually not so bad. Like, they're not a shining star, but like, they're not the awful person that I thought they were.
Well, you start to see things from a different perspective as you understand them more, right? Absolutely. And that's the empathy thing. That's all about trust and understanding people, right? Mm-hmm. And that's some people get it right away. Some people, it takes time and trust to build that and understand it. And the more experience with that person, the better you get at it. And other people can read it sooner. I don't know, but it's empathy. A lot of it's empathy, because after a while you start to realize, okay, this, like you say, this person's not my cup of tea, but they're not evil.
Yeah, exactly.
They're just not who I want to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to double down on that point. They're not evil, because it can sometimes feel like there's just so much evil in the world. And I think there's enough, but I think that when you really take the time to learn individuals, that there's not as much evil as it feels like.
No, and it comes back to conversation and misunderstanding.
Exactly.
Like you said, oftentimes you're not in their shoes. You don't understand why they did what they did. You just think it's wrong. Then when you look at it and you talk to them and you get opinions and how they were feeling at the time, you go, okay, I can see why you did what you did at that time.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this idea that we're all filters. So like when you hear an opinion from someone that is something you very much disagree with, and you're like, it's something that makes you usually kind of roll your eyes and be like, holy shit, how could you possibly think that? Like, for example, if someone was just straight up like, yeah, all black people are stupid or something like that, I would just be like, oh my God, how did you just say that? Like, how could you possibly have that as a genuine opinion? Like, what kind of freaking life circumstance led you to that, or anything of that manner, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting because it's like we're all this accumulation. There's this simultaneous thing that we just talked about where we're all this accumulation of our happenstance from birth until any given moment, and all the experiences and opinions and communication that we've had accumulating over time to turn us into, at any given moment in time, we are a filter of all of those things. We now have something that comes out based on all of those things that we've had in our life, right?
Yeah.
And when you judge someone on their opinions, it's like you're just judging how good of a filter they are.
Oh, I suppose. I see. I see where you're going with that. Yeah.
So it's
I finally see what side of the Lego you're building here.
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so it's like we're just all filters judging each other's ability to be a filter.
Yeah. Yeah. And not necessarily, and because what they filter is different than what you filter, because like you said, their experiences, their lifestyle, their choices in life have made them a different person than you.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing with communicating, just because what I see and understand is not the same as what you see and understand, because we come from it from different perspectives. And that's all what communication is understanding that those options are there.
Yeah. And it just makes me think, like, I just feel like building that kind of image makes it a lot easier to not be upset with people or not think people are bad people. It's like, oh, you're just a different filter than I am. You've just had different things that have built you to the filter you are.
It's yes, absolutely. And then as long as you can understand that, you can communicate with those people, even though their filter is different than yours. Their understanding, their accepting of certain things is different than what you would accept. You can understand where they're coming from and you can communicate with them, even though it's not your typical conversation that you enjoy, because you have that understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find it fascinating when someone will say the example I gave earlier, or people are like, oh yeah, we should just, these kind of people should just be killed, or those kind of people are useless, or I don't like gays, or whatever it is. And it's like, holy shit, what have you been through? Like how do you get to there? This seems crazy to me, because like, I feel like there's certain things that we need to just, I've thought a lot about how like there's people just debating all kinds of shit, especially right now. And people are debating nuanced things. Like, holy shit, I'm not going to get into it, but what is a woman? Yeah. Like, people debating gender and stuff. It's like, what? Hang on, guys. I'm just like, can we come to an agreement on some simple stuff first? Like, like, how about you should, like, is violence necessary? It's like, okay, well, that's too complicated. It's too broad spectrum of an answer. It's like a dinner plate question. But if we dial that down to something a little more specific, and you're like, should you be violent towards someone just because they have a different religion than you? Well, no, right? Like, no, you shouldn't.
Well, then where do you draw the line? They like the color red and you like the color blue, so I hate you?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, if they like red and you like blue and you want to be violent towards them because of that, that's probably a bad idea too. Good. I'm glad we cleared that up, Scott. Right? Like, that's
but
what
I mean,
saying.
where do you draw the line? like, do you draw the line at religion? Do you draw the line at opinion? Do you draw the line at color?
That's my point, Scott, is
Yes.
why the hell don't we draw some freaking lines? Why don't we have that conversation as a society, as a culture, and be like, okay, if someone doesn't like the same color as you, you can't be violent towards them. That's a no-no. That's not a good
Well,
reason.
luckily, most of society gets that. There's still a lot of people that only see in black or white, and they don't accept that there's gray.
Which is fine if that individual is, I don't know, Dave that works at a factory and goes fishing on the weekend. But once those individuals get to be, say, a police officer or a judge or a prime minister, then you get to a point where you're like, okay, this guy needs to get his head straight. This individual needs to clearly sort some shit out for some obvious things. Like, I mean, for example, our prime minister calling people racist as just his like opt out for things.
Yes.
He's
his go-to.
Yeah, he's just notorious for calling people racist when they don't agree with him. And it's like, yes. That's not how that works. You can't just do that. It's so hilarious.
That's the buzzword that society jumps on now.
I know, but it's like racism is in an all-time low with modern culture compared to where it was. And this guy's just throwing the word racism around to get out of everything. Like
the guy who wore blackface.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what the hell are we talking about? So I just mean, I think certain things like that need to be like, can you call someone racist? Okay. Under what circumstance can you title someone as racist? We should define that shit so that people can't just willy-nilly throw that around vaguely, and then everyone's like, oh, I guess those people are racist because he's the prime minister and he says things that are correct or whatever.
He said it, so it's got to be true.
Yeah. It's like, why?
That's what I mean. There's people that don't accept the gray in the world. And you have to understand that nothing is absolute when dealing with people. There's no right, wrong, black, white. There's a lot of variations, and that's what makes the human race so interesting, is the variations that we have. You can't live in a black and white world because it doesn't work, and you're going to be constantly in confrontation because of it. What's a man? What's a woman? Well, you don't fit a male or female profile, so you're not either. Well, yeah, there are gray areas, and there's going to be, and that's okay, because guess what? It doesn't directly affect you. So why are you upset about this?
Yeah.
Your neighbor paints his house yellow. You don't like yellow. That's his flavor of the week, whatever. It's not.
Don't like yellow houses. Don't like yellow houses.
And unfortunately, people have a hard time understanding that there's going to be gray areas, and policing is all about the gray areas.
And that's what I was going to ask next. Is like, you're talking about when you were pulling people over on the 401, and you were like, oh, if anyone goes over 30 over the limit, that's when I pull them over, because like you're advised to do 20 over the limit. And you're like, yeah.
No, we weren't. No, we were never advised.
Oh, you were never advised. Interesting.
No, that was just something that guys did, and everybody followed that.
See, I find that so fascinating. It's like, because speed limit is math. It's numbers.
And it's an absolute.
Yeah, this is the one thing where there isn't a gray area. Like, you can't 2 + 2 and maybe get something other than 4. It's always 4, period. Non-negotiable, right? So like, ever since I was a kid, when my dad was speeding, he was going like 16 over the limit, which is usually what I go everywhere. I was like, Dad, you're speeding. And he's like, well, yeah, they don't really, And I'm like, but it's a number. And I'm like, me as a child, I'm like, no, numbers, like it's super simple. And he's like, yeah, well, he's trying to explain to me. I never got it. I never understood. And like, now you're saying that it wasn't even like, no chief, nobody of authority at any point said, hey guys, anything under 20 over is fine. No one said that to you at any point. That was just a understood thing.
Yep.
That's hilarious to me, because like,
okay, so how far back do you want to go though? Where do you allow? So is 80, if the speed limit's 80, is 81 an offense?
Yes.
So now I'm saying that the mechanical devices in your car are, and you tell me that arm on a pendulum, the needle width is 2 kilometers.
Yep.
And the gauge it has 80 and 90.
Yep.
And a stick in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
And
I
then
mean,
and the needle itself is 2 kilometers wide.
right. But
So do
it's,
I write you up for 81? Because speed limit is 80.
but realistically, it's no different than right now because the speed limit is 80, but I never go over 100. Because if I'm going under 100, I'm really not going to get pulled over. I shouldn't say never. There's occasions where I'm late for work. All right. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But rarely do I ever go over 100 in an 80. Rarely do I ever go over 110 in a 90. I always use that 20-kilometer rule. So what's the difference between me staying under 120 and I stay under 120 as in like 116? Because then that 2-kilometer needle, I got a little bit of wiggle room, right? I know
Right.
I'm not going to be over 120. So what's the difference between that and actually having a hard, fast thing? There's no difference. It's just nobody would be, if the speed limits on the 401, for example, were 120, nobody would be going 120. Everyone would be going 115, 112, 110, whatever their comfort level is on how close you want to get to the edge of that, what the word limit means. How about that? Right? Like,
I always said there should be a minimum and a maximum,
mm-hmm.
and it should be strictly enforced.
Yes.
So you're on the highway and it's you want people to travel 80 kilometers an hour. The minimum is 70, the maximum is 90.
Yeah.
You should be within that range.
I totally agree with that.
If you're going 60, I'm going to give you a ticket. This is not the road for you.
Unless
if
you
you're
got
going
shit going on, like
this is not your speed. This is not the road for you.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, like you say, everybody's going to push the limit.
Yeah. And
so if we have a variable limit, you can be somewhere in that range and be comfortable. It's not going to hurt anybody. We're all traveling at roughly the same speed. You got to remember that it all comes down to, and this is hard to explain to people too, especially young police officers, because they don't understand it until they actually get out there and do it. But traffic generally flows in a variance like that. Most people travel that range. The problems happen when there's huge discrepancies in that range. So you got somebody now doing 160 coming up on people doing 110. That's where we have problems, right? So those are the variations that we as police officers want to eliminate, because that's where I'm going to investigate a crash. That's where there's going to be a problem.
Yeah. And then at that point, it's almost like it's kind of, I guess it's come to a point where stay around 100, don't go too much over 100, and go with the flow of traffic.
Yes.
Right? Because I've been in Toronto area or on the queue out to Niagara and going 140 and getting run over by people.
And that's the flow of traffic. Yes.
Yeah. And I get to, when I was in my little shitbox Volkswagen 2001, right? And I get up to like 130 and the whole thing's vibrating. I'm like, I'm not going as fast as these people. My car is going to blow up. It's so interesting to me because it's like now that we're having the discussion, I'm kind of realizing that it's almost as if we're at a point where the law is don't go too far over this number and go with the flow of traffic. So
yeah, because ultimately that's where it's safe.
Yeah.
Right? I stopped a guy for speeding a long time ago in a Volvo, going 180 kilometers an hour. And he said to me, Volvo's one of the safest cars made on the road. Do you agree with me, officer? And I said, yes, I've seen crash reports. I know Volvo is particularly well known for its safety features. And he says, this is a brand new stretch of paved highway. They've paid the paving companies to make sure that it's level, it's smooth, there's no deviations in the pavement, so that there won't be any problems, right? And I said, yes. So he says, theoretically, there's nothing that can go wrong with me going 180 on this highway. And of course, my answer was, this road is only as safe as the poorest driver out here. So you might be perfectly safe going 180, but the guy that's reaching for his coffee cup that he dropped and swerves into your lane, would you rather get hit at 180 or would you rather get hit at 100?
Yeah.
And that's what it all comes down to. It's about the flow of traffic. It's about keeping things consistent so that it's safe.
Well, that's the thing, right? It gets down to a point where it's this whole safety of it. I saw like a artificial intelligence or digital rendition of like a virtual car hitting a post at different speeds. And like once you get up to certain speeds, it's just, there's nothing left. It's like, you know that there's no safety features. There's no engineering.
Nothing's going to help you.
Yeah, nothing's going to help you. You're dead. And it's like that speed isn't much more than 100 kilometers an hour, right? Like once you get up faster than 100 kilometers an hour, you're hitting speeds where you're just dead if you hit something that dead stops you.
But this will all be a moot point because we're all going to have electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And then the government can just control the speed of all those vehicles all at the same time.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Control the speed of all of them, shut them all down. I mean, you look at the movie I, Robot, where he's just sitting in a car and it's just driving him, and then he takes over on manual mode to like escape the robots or some shit. And it's like, yeah, we're possibly just moving towards that. But
It's already happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tesla already controls their cars.
Yeah.
They do updates. They do upgrades. When California had the wildfires, Tesla upgraded all the people who lived in California so that their battery would last longer so they could get out of the fire zones. So
Really?
It's already here.
They upgraded their batteries remotely.
Yes, they downloaded a different program into the car that would extend the battery power so that the car would last longer to get them out of California or where the wildfires were.
I guess the only defense I could possibly think for that is that maybe operating it like that does not account for the longevity of the battery. Maybe that wears the battery out faster.
Probably.
Maybe.
There's probably some scientific reason why they set it at a certain limit, but it's interesting to note that they could willy-nilly change it whenever they felt like it.
Yeah.
And car owners didn't know.
That is very interesting to know. And
so the argument is, do you actually own the car when the manufacturer can change anything on it at any time?
That's a good point. And that's made me wonder about vehicles. I've had a lot of apocalypse style thoughts lately since the pandemic. And I thought about like, what is the car that you should get? Like, what is the internal combustion engine, easy to repair yourself, will never die, tough as nails, old school vehicle you should get that has like almost no digital parts in it for just in case shit goes south?
Yeah, a 1965 anything is pretty much there.
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking about. Yeah. Okay, well, we've been going for pretty much 2 hours here, Scott. This has been a blast. I've had fun.
We didn't resolve anything or
what do you mean?
Come to any conclusions, but
what do you mean? We resolved a lot of stuff. We talked about a lot of things.
It was interesting. It was awesome.
Yeah. I have one last question for you that I like to try to remember to ask everyone. If you could imagine the consciousness represented by a little man in your head watching a laptop screen, right? Or a screen of some sort. You know how people put sticky notes on the side of their screen to help them remember things?
Okay.
Yeah. If you could write something on a sticky note that would just magically appear in the consciousness of all people on the planet all at once, what would you write on that sticky note?
Treat people like you want to be treated.
That's solid. I like that one.
I live by that.
Yeah.
That's been my philosophy. And I think that got me through 33 years of policing without a lot of confrontation because of that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, all right, Scott, is there anything else you want to say to our potential listeners? Maybe 8 of them?
Well, we didn't really talk too much about policing, but
sure we did.
We did have some good communication.
Yeah, well, is there anything more about policing that you wanted to talk about?
Oh, there's no limit to where we could have gone with that. No, we're good.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And you're not really a social media guy or anything, so we will end that there. Hey, you listening to this right now. Yes, you. I appreciate that you've listened to it this far. That's awesome. And that means that you at least enjoyed it, or else you would have stopped it and went and done something else. And it would be really cool if you could share it with someone. I'm sure you know somebody that might also enjoy it. So just, hit the little share button and there'll be like a link you can copy and you can just text it to your BFF Jill. I don't know if you know a Jill. I don't know. Just somebody. Just share it with one person and I will be forever grateful. Thank you. Have a great day.